I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not the kind of person who makes scenes. I am not the kind of person who fires off angry emails or storms into offices or tells people exactly what I think of them in the middle of a meeting. I never have been. My mother raised me to be measured, to think before I speak, to pick my battles carefully and only fight the ones worth fighting. For most of my life, that quality served me well. And then I met Pamela. Pamela taught me something my mother never did. She taught me that quiet women are not passive women, that patience is not the same as weakness, and that sometimes, the most devastating thing you can do to someone who has spent years taking everything from you is simply to wait, to document, to say nothing. And then, at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, to tell the truth. Just the truth, nothing more. I have thought a lot about whether what I did was revenge. I have turned it over in my mind more times than I can count in the years since it happened. And I keep coming back to the same answer. It was not revenge, it was a correction. A long, carefully timed, deeply satisfying correction. If you're watching this, click on the subscribe button, as what happened next will blow your mind. My name is Lisa Miles. I am 38 years old. I live outside of Chicago, Illinois, with my husband and our two kids. I work in marketing, have done for almost 15 years. I am good at my job. I have always been good at my job. I have the track record, the results, the campaigns, the numbers to prove it. What I did not have, for a significant stretch of my career, was the credit, because someone else was taking it. This is that story, and I want to tell you all of it, from the beginning, because the beginning matters. The beginning is where you see how something like this starts not with a dramatic confrontation or a single defining moment, but slowly, quietly, the way the worst things always start. I had been with the company for 4 years when Pamela joined. 4 years of building something, 4 years of learning the systems, the clients, the rhythms of the department, 4 years of producing work that was, by any measurable standard, good. The company was a mid-sized retailer, the kind of company that is big enough to have a real marketing department but small enough that everyone knows everyone. I was a manager. I handled the website, the stores, the monthly sales materials, the advertising, the department's budget, the project management, the creative briefs, the reporting. It was a full role. More than full, honestly. But I was proud of it. I had built the systems that made it run. I knew where every number came from. I could stand in any meeting and answer any question about any campaign we had ever run. When the VP of Marketing and Sales position opened up, I was not the front runner. I knew that. The role was senior to mine and I was young for it. But I had been told, quietly, by people I trusted, that I was being considered, that my work had been noticed at the right levels. And then Pamela was hired. She was in her mid-40s. She came from a competitor, one of those moves that looks impressive on a resume because the name recognition carries weight, even if what she actually did there was never quite as substantial as it sounded. She was polished. She knew how to walk into a room and fill it with confidence. She had the kind of presence that makes senior leadership feel reassured before she has said anything of substance. I found out later she was the fourth choice for the position, that three other candidates had turned it down or been eliminated before her name came up, that she had been hired, in part, to meet certain expectations the board had around leadership diversity. That is not a knock on her, those expectations matter, and they should exist. But it is relevant to understanding what came next. Because Pamela arrived carrying the weight of being an appointment rather than a first choice, and I think some part of her knew it. And I think that knowledge is at least part of what made her do what she did. She needed to look like she deserved the role, and the easiest way to do that was to make my work look like hers. It started with the emails. I would draft something, a campaign brief, a project update, a report for the executive team, and send it to Pamela for review before it went up the chain. That was the process. She was my direct manager. That was how it worked. Except she wasn't reviewing them and sending them forward with my name still on them. She was removing my name, putting hers on them, and sending them as her own work. I did not realize this was happening at first. Why would I? I was busy. I was producing. My head was down in the work, and I trusted that the process was working the way processes are supposed to work. The first time I got a real signal that something was wrong was in a leadership meeting about 6 months into Pamela's tenure. I had spent 3 weeks building a comprehensive holiday sales report, the kind of analysis that required pulling data from 6 different systems, cross referencing it against the previous 3 years, building the projections, writing the narrative. It was some of the most detailed work I had ever produced. In the meeting, Pamela presented it, word for word, slide for slide. I sat in the room and listened to her describe findings she had not made, conclusions she had not drawn, recommendations she had not written. I watched senior leadership nod and take notes and ask her questions that she sometimes answered correctly and sometimes fumbled through. And when the meeting ended and people were gathering their things, I heard the CFO tell her it was excellent work. She thanked him. She did not look at me once. I sat in my seat after the room had emptied, and I sat with the feeling of it. That particular kind of anger that has nowhere to go because you are not even sure yet exactly what you are angry about. Because surely this was some kind of oversight. She would mention my contribution. She would forward the credit. She would say something. She never said anything. The next report I built, I paid close attention. I sent it to her with my name on the header, my name in the footer, my name in the document properties. A week later, I saw a version of it circulating in an executive email chain. My name was gone. Hers was there instead. That was when I knew. It was not an oversight. It was a choice. A deliberate, repeated, calculated choice. And I had to figure out what to do about it. I want to be honest about this part, because I think it is the part that people, especially women, will recognize most deeply. And it is the part that is hardest to explain to people who have not lived it. I did not say anything. Not immediately. Not for a while. And I need to tell you why. Not to excuse it. Not to make myself sound noble. But because the reasons are real and complicated, and I think they matter. The first reason was practical. I had no proof yet. Not the kind that would hold up in a conversation with HR or with Pamela's supervisor. What did I have? The feeling that something was wrong. The observation that my name kept disappearing from documents. Those things are real, but they are not evidence. And going to someone in authority with feelings and observations, without receipts, is how you end up looking paranoid or bitter, or like the kind of employee who causes problems. The second reason was more personal and harder to admit. I was afraid, not of Pamela specifically, but of what happens to women in professional settings when they speak up about something like this. I had watched it happen to others. I had seen colleagues raise concerns about unfair treatment and find themselves suddenly sidelined, suddenly passed over, suddenly described in performance reviews, in hallway conversations as difficult, hard to work with, not a team player. I did not want to be described that way. I had worked too hard and too long to build a reputation I was proud of. And the thought of having that reputation damaged because I raised a concern that someone higher up decided to minimize that thought was paralyzing. So I said nothing. And in the space of my silence, Pamela kept taking. She took the Q3 campaign results I had built. She took the vendor negotiation framework I had spent months developing. She took the holiday merchandising strategy that generated the department's best sales growth in 4 years, an 87% increase, which she later claimed at another company as her own achievement. 87%, my number, my strategy, my work, her claim. And while all of this was happening, my body was keeping score in ways I was not fully acknowledging. I was getting headaches. I was not sleeping well. I was coming home from work every day with this low, persistent anger sitting in my chest that I could not put down, but also could not fully explain to my husband, because to explain it fully would have meant saying out loud that I was being professionally robbed and doing nothing about it. And then I got sick, really sick. It started as what I thought was a persistent cold, the kind that drags on for 2 weeks and makes you feel run down, but not quite bad enough to stop working. I kept going in. I kept producing. I kept sending reports and briefs and strategies to Pamela's inbox with my name on them, knowing what would happen to that name, telling myself I was gathering evidence even as I was also just surviving. And then one morning I woke up, and I couldn't get out of bed. Not in the tired way, in the something is genuinely wrong way. My husband took one look at me and drove me to the emergency room without discussion. And what started as what I thought was exhaustion and stress turned out to be a serious infection that had progressed to sepsis. My body had been fighting something for so long, under so much sustained stress, that it had stopped fighting effectively. I was in the hospital for 4 days. And those 4 days lying in a hospital bed with IV lines and monitoring equipment and the particular kind of forced stillness that illness brings were the first time in years that I had actually been completely still. That I hadn't been producing or planning or managing or trying to stay ahead of whatever Pamela was going to claim as hers next. And in that stillness, something shifted. My husband sat with me the first night. He held my hand and he said something I had heard him say before but had never quite let land.
You are making yourself sick for a company that doesn't even know what you're contributing. That has to stop, Lisa. Whatever it has to stop.
I looked at him for a long time, and I said, I know. Because I did know. I had known for a while. I had just been too busy being angry and afraid to do anything useful with the knowing. But lying in that hospital bed, I made myself a promise. I was going to stop being silent. I was going to start being strategic. And I was going to be so careful, so thorough, so patient that when the moment came, there would be no way to question what had happened. I got out my phone, and from my hospital bed, I started checking my email. What I found made me forget, for a full 10 minutes, that I was in a hospital at all. I need to explain something. Part of my role, the administrative side that nobody glamorous wants, but that keeps a department functioning, included access to Pamela's email. Not her personal email, her work inbox. I had been given that access in my first month under her so I could manage scheduling, file receipts, coordinate responses when she was traveling or in back-to-back meetings. It was access I had used professionally and appropriately for years. Lying in my hospital bed, with that particular clarity that comes from being forced to stop and look at things honestly, I opened her inbox. I told myself I was just checking for anything urgent that might need redirecting. That was partially true, but I also knew, somewhere beneath that practical justification, that I was looking for something. I found it. At the top of her inbox, from the past 3 days, were emails she had not yet filed. And in those emails, I found two things that changed everything. The first was an email chain with a headhunter. Pamela was quietly interviewing for positions at other companies, which would have been her business and none of mine, except that in the attachments to one of those emails was a CV. Her CV. And in her CV, she had listed as her own achievements, campaigns, and results that I had built, including the 87% holiday sales growth, which she described in her own words as something she had personally strategized and executed. I read that line 3 times. I took a screenshot. The second thing I found was more immediately relevant. There was a message from our company's senior VP, Pamela's boss, asking her about a specific budget variance in a report that had gone up to the board that week. A report I had written. A report with my analysis and my numbers. And in her reply, Pamela had fumbled the explanation so badly that the senior VP had followed up with a second message asking her to clarify. And she had fumbled that too. She didn't understand the numbers because she hadn't run them. She had just put her name on them. I lay in my hospital bed and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not anger. Something cooler than anger. Something that felt almost like calm. I had what I needed. Not everything, but enough to start. And I was still in a hospital gown. I went back to work 10 days after I was discharged. My doctor had wanted me to take longer. My husband had wanted me to take longer. I came back in 9 days because I had a plan, and I needed to be in the building to execute it. The plan was simple, elegant, even. I was going to stop trying to put my name on things and start making it impossible for anyone to pretend those things had been done by anyone else. Step 1 was the BCC. I had a good relationship with Pamela's supervisor, the senior VP, whose name was Gerald. We had worked on a few cross-departmental projects together before Pamela arrived. He respected my work. He knew who I was. And crucially, he was in the habit of responding directly to whoever sent him information, which meant that if I sent him something directly, he would respond to me directly. So I changed my process. Instead of sending reports and briefs to Pamela and trusting that she would forward them appropriately, I started sending them to Pamela as I always had, but I also began quietly BCCing Gerald on every significant piece of work. Not with a note, not with an explanation, just the work. With my name on it, arriving in his inbox at the same time it arrived in hers. I was careful. I sent the BCC versions a few minutes after I sent to Pamela, So there was no way to accuse me of going around her deliberately. It just looked like I was keeping senior leadership informed, which, technically, I was. And then I waited. It did not take long. 3 weeks after I came back from the hospital, Pamela presented another report in a leadership meeting, a campaign performance analysis I had spent 2 weeks building. She stood at the front of the conference room and walked through it slide by slide, using my words, citing my numbers, accepting the nods of approval from around the table. And then Gerald asked her a question.
This is impressive, Pamela. Walk me through the methodology on the attribution modeling for Q4. I want to understand how you weighted the online versus in-store conversion data. The room was quiet. Waiting. And Pamela polished, confident, always knows what to say. Pamela paused.
The attribution modeling was we used a multi-touch approach, so it's looking at the full customer journey across.
Right, but the weighting. The report shows a 60-40 split in favor of in-store. How did you arrive at that specific ratio? Another pause. Shorter but more visible.
We looked at the historical patterns, and the data suggested that the in-store touchpoints were carrying more weight in the final conversion decision, so we adjusted accordingly.
It was the right answer in spirit, but it was vague. And Gerald, who had received my original analysis 3 weeks earlier with the full methodology explained, knew it was vague.
Interesting. Because the version I have shows a fairly specific regression analysis behind that number. What was the sample size on that regression? Silence. A long silence. The kind that has a sound to it. Pamela looked down at the report in her hands, and then she looked up, and her eyes found me across the table, and I held her gaze with the most neutral expression I have ever held in my life. I did not smirk. I did not raise an eyebrow. I just looked back at her with absolutely nothing on my face.
I'd need to check my notes to give you the exact figure.
Of course. Send it through when you have a chance. He moved on. The meeting continued. But something had shifted. I could feel it. Gerald could feel it. And Pamela, I could tell from the way she held herself for the rest of that meeting. A little more stiffly, a little more carefully. Pamela could feel it too. After the meeting I went back to my desk and I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of satisfaction. 30 seconds. And then I went back to work. Because I was not done.
What I have not told you yet is what was happening to Pamela at the same time all of this was unfolding. She was interviewing, quietly and consistently. The headhunter emails I had found in her inbox were the beginning of a process that had apparently been going on for several months. She was looking for a way out, or rather, a way up, to something bigger and more senior at another company. And she was using my work to get there. Every interview she walked in wearing my achievements like a coat she had borrowed and never given back. I knew this because Pamela was not as careful as she thought she was. The headhunter emails kept coming, and I kept reading them. I know some people will have a problem with that, with the ethics of reading someone else's inbox, and I have thought about it. I have sat with the discomfort of it. But I was using access that had been formally given to me for a role that required it, to document wrongdoing that was directly harming me. I make no apology for it. By the time Pamela had her first serious interview with a company she was genuinely excited about, I could tell by the tone of her emails, the way she had started padding her CV with even more of my work. I had a folder on my personal laptop with 14 months of documentation, emails, version history on shared documents showing my edits before her name appeared. BCC threads with Gerald showing my work arriving in his inbox before Pamela claimed it in meetings. Screenshots of her CV with my achievements listed under her name. 14 months. I had been patient. I had been so patient. And then Pamela left. She got the job she wanted, a senior director role at another firm, a step up from her VP title. She announced it in a company-wide email full of warm language about incredible journeys and exciting new chapters. She shook hands with the executives. She had a farewell lunch that I attended, smiling, wishing her well, saying all the right things. She looked at me across the room at one point, and I think she expected me to look angry, or hurt, or relieved. Something that told her she had gotten away with it. I smiled at her. I genuinely smiled, because I knew something she didn't. She was walking into her new role carrying a CV full of work she couldn't explain. And I knew where she was going. And I knew people there. 6 months passed. I had been promoted in the restructure that followed Pamela's departure. Gerald had been paying attention, it turned out, in ways I hadn't fully realized. The regression analysis question in that meeting had been the beginning of a longer private investigation on his part. He had gone back through 2 years of reports and presentations and, with access to the version histories I had quietly made sure were preserved, had traced the authorship of virtually everything significant that had come out of our department. He had not said anything to me directly. He had simply started treating me the way a VP of marketing and sales should be treated, with a corresponding title and salary adjustment. I want to be clear, he handled it imperfectly. He should have done more, sooner. He should have caught this earlier. And I told him so, in a direct conversation that I am proud of. Because that directness was something the old version of me, the one who said nothing and got sick, would not have been capable of. He agreed. He apologized. We moved forward. 6 months after Pamela left, I moved to a new company. A larger firm, a better role, a team I genuinely loved from the first week. My creative director there, a woman named Sandra, was someone I had admired for years. She was rigorous and fair, and she ran one of the tightest and most ethical departments I had ever encountered. I had been there for about 4 months when Sandra called me into her office one afternoon.
Hey, I wanted to run a candidate by you before we move forward. She's applied for a senior director role on the creative team. You worked at the same company for a few years, I think. Pamela. Do you know her?
I sat very still for a moment. The kind of still that is not stillness at all, but the appearance of stillness while everything inside you rearranges itself. I do, I said.
She's got a strong CV. That 87% holiday sales growth is particularly impressive. What can you tell me about her?
And there it was. My number. My strategy. My 18 months of work, listed on her CV, in an interview for a job at the company where I now worked, being described to me by someone asking for my honest professional assessment. I took a breath, and then I told the truth. I want to be very precise about what I said, because this matters. Because there is a version of this story where I walk into Sandra's office and unload everything, the stolen reports, the CV with my achievements on it, the emails, all 14 months of documentation in a flood of justified anger. And there is a version where I say nothing, or something diplomatic and vague, because I am still afraid of being seen as difficult. I did neither of those things. I said calmly, professionally, in complete sentences. Pamela is talented in certain areas. She presents well and she has strong client-facing instincts. However, in my experience working under her, she had a pattern of presenting team members' work as her own in senior leadership settings. The 87% holiday sales growth on her CV, I can tell you specifically, because I built that campaign. I managed the strategy, the vendor negotiations, the budget, and the reporting. Pamela's direct contribution to that result was limited. I think it's important you know that before you move forward. Sandra looked at me for a long moment.
That's a significant thing to say about a colleague.
I know, I said. That's why I'm saying it carefully. If you want the documentation version histories, email chains, the original files, I have them. I kept everything. Another long look.
Send it through. I'd like to see it.
I sent it through that evening. 3 days later, Pamela's application was marked as disqualified. I found out because Sandra told me, directly, with the same directness I had used with her.
We won't be moving forward with her. And Lisa, thank you for being honest. I know that wasn't easy.
It was, actually. By then, it was the easiest thing I had done in years. The easiest thing in years. Isn't that something? I found out what happened to Pamela in pieces over the following months, through the professional network that connects people in any industry where everyone eventually knows everyone. The senior director role she had taken, the one she had walked into wearing my achievements, began to unravel within the first year. Without my work to present as hers, without the systems and strategies and frameworks I had built over 4 years to draw from, she had to produce, independently, consistently. And the work she produced on her own was not the same. People noticed. I heard she was put on a performance improvement plan within 14 months of starting the role. I heard the team she managed had a high turnover rate. I heard that in one particularly difficult client meeting, She had been asked questions about campaign methodology she could not answer, and that the client had specifically mentioned that things had felt stronger when they worked with our old firm. Our old firm, where she had taken my work and I had said nothing. I am not going to pretend I felt nothing when I heard these things. I am human. There was something that moved through me when I heard about that performance improvement plan. Something that I will be honest and call satisfaction. Even though I know satisfaction in someone else's failure is not a quality to be proud of, but I also felt something else, something quieter and more sustaining. The feeling of having done the right thing not just for myself, but for Sandra's team who deserved to know who they were actually hiring. For the clients who deserved work that was genuinely conceived and not borrowed. For every person whose contribution had ever been erased by someone in a position of power who understood that the people below them were unlikely to speak up, I spoke up. Eventually, carefully, with evidence, in complete sentences. And it was enough. I want to go back to something, because I think the BCC strategy, the quiet, patient, methodical way I started making my authorship undeniable, is the part of this story that I get the most questions about when I tell it. And I want to give it the attention it deserves. Because it was not an accident. It was not a lucky break. It was a choice I made deliberately from my hospital bed while I was still in a gown and attached to an IV, as one does. Here's what I understood. By the time I came back to that office after my illness, confronting Pamela directly would have accomplished nothing. She would have denied it. She would have reframed it. She would have positioned me as a disgruntled employee with a personal grudge, and she had the seniority and the polish to make that framing stick. A direct confrontation, without evidence, would have been the end of me, not her. Going to HR with my feelings and my observations would have had a similar result. HR protects companies. In situations where the accused holds more organizational power than the accuser, HR's primary instinct is to minimize and contain, not to investigate thoroughly or administer justice. I had seen this happen to other people. I was not going to be next. What I needed was for the truth to reveal itself, not through my accusation, but through her own exposure. And that is exactly what the BCC accomplished. Every significant piece of work I produced, I sent to Gerald with my name on it, in a format he could see, at a timestamp he could verify, before Pamela had the chance to claim it. I was not accusing Pamela of anything. I was simply making sure that the person above her had a record of who was actually doing the work. And Gerald, because he was observant and because he had started to notice the discrepancy between what Pamela claimed in meetings and what she could actually explain, started paying attention. He started pulling the thread. And when he pulled it, it unraveled far more than I had even documented. He found things I hadn't found, patterns I hadn't noticed. A broader picture of what had been happening in that department for almost 2 years. And he acted on it. Not immediately, not dramatically, but he acted. The correction came. It just came quietly and thoroughly and in a way that left no room for Pamela to claim she had been treated unfairly. Because she hadn't been. She had been treated exactly as fairly as the evidence required. That is the thing about truth. When you document it carefully and present it without embellishment, it doesn't need you to advocate for it. It advocates for itself. I have been told, in the years since this happened, that my story is inspiring. I am always slightly uncomfortable with that word. Not because the story does not matter to me, it matters enormously, but because inspiration implies something exceptional, something rare, something that most people do not and cannot do. And I do not believe this story is exceptional. I believe situations like mine happen every single day. In marketing departments, in law firms, in hospitals, in schools, in retail stores, and every other kind of workplace where people produce and other people take, where the quietest, most hardworking people in the room find that their work travels upward without their name attached, where the people who build things watch other people take bows. What is perhaps less common is having the presence of mind and the patience and the energy to document it, to wait, to be strategic instead of reactive, to let the truth do the work instead of trying to force a confrontation before you have the receipts to back it up. But that skill, that way of approaching an injustice, is learnable. I was not born with it. I developed it out of necessity, and significantly out of desperation, lying in a hospital bed realizing that my body had been paying the price for my silence. I want to tell you where I am today, because I think the ending of a story matters as much as everything that came before it. I am at a company I love. I have a team I am proud of. I have a creative director who is rigorous and fair, and who, when I produce something, makes sure my name is on it in every format, in every meeting, in every communication up the chain. The difference between working in that environment and working under Pamela is something I feel every single day. The way your shoulders sit differently when you do not have to brace for something to be taken. The way your mind works differently when you know your effort will be acknowledged. My husband says I seem like myself again. He said it about 3 months into the new job, casually, over dinner, and then looked slightly startled at his own honesty.
You seem like yourself, like the person I married.
I laughed. Not because it was funny exactly, but because I understood what he meant. And because recognizing that the person I had been for 14 months, the tight, careful, constantly guarded person who came home every evening carrying something invisible and heavy, recognizing that she was not who I actually was both a relief and a grief simultaneously. I grieved a little for those 14 months, for what they cost me, for the version of my career those years might have been if Pamela had been a different kind of leader, for the health I spent. And then I let that grief go. Because what came after was worth it. Not just the professional outcome, not just the promotion or the new job or the deeply satisfying moment of clicking send on 14 months of documentation and watching justice take its course, but the version of myself I became in the process. The woman who learned how to be patient and strategic and utterly immovably clear. The woman who learned that speaking the truth simply, calmly, with receipts is its own form of power. The woman who learned that quiet is not the same as powerless. Those are things Pamela gave me without intending to. And in a strange way, I am grateful. In a very small, very complicated way, I am grateful. I want to end by talking to you, because if you have listened this far, I think there is something here that touched something real in your own experience. Maybe you have had a Pamela. Maybe you are sitting with a Pamela right now. Maybe you are the person who has been sending things up the chain and watching them arrive at the top with someone else's name attached. Maybe you are the person who has been pulling the weight of a team or a department or an entire operation while someone above you accepts the credit and the compensation that should have been yours. If that is you, I see you. And I need you to hear something. You are not invisible, even when it feels that way. Even when your name keeps disappearing from things you built. Even when you sit in meetings and listen to your own work described in someone else's voice, and nobody in the room seems to notice that the words don't quite fit the speaker, you are not invisible. You are just being obscured, and obscured things can be uncovered. Start documenting. Today, not tomorrow. Today. Every report, every email, every strategy, every piece of work that has your thinking in it. Keep a copy that lives outside the company's systems. Keep a record that belongs to you and can travel with you regardless of what happens. Build your relationships, not because you are building a case, though that may become necessary, but because your work deserves to be seen by more than one pair of eyes. Because professional isolation is how this kind of theft thrives. The more people who know your work, the harder it becomes to claim. And trust the truth. It is slower than confrontation. It is slower than anger. But it is more durable than both. When the moment comes, and it will come, the truth told calmly with evidence will accomplish more than the loudest accusation ever could. You have already done the hardest part. You have done the work. You have produced the thing that someone else is trying to claim. The work exists. It was done by you. That fact does not change just because someone removed your name from the header. It is still yours. It will always be yours. And one day, with patience, with documentation, and with the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who knows exactly what they built, you will get to say so. In the right room, at the right time, with the receipts to prove it. If this story is your story or close to your story, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Tell me how you handled it, or how you are handling it, or what you wish you had known. Because these conversations matter. The more we have them, openly and honestly, the less power this kind of behavior has. And if you are somewhere in the middle of it right now, still silent, still holding everything, still telling yourself it will work itself out, I need you to hear this one last thing. It does not work itself out, not on its own. But you can work it out, carefully, quietly, with evidence, on your terms. That is what I did. And I am sitting here today, in a job I love, with my name on everything I build, telling you that it was worth every careful, patient, documented step. Hit the like button if this story stayed with you. Subscribe to Office Confession for stories of women at work, at home, and everywhere in between who were pushed too far and decided they were done being quiet about it. Take care of yourselves, document everything, and never, ever stop putting your name on your work. I will talk to you next time.